Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today and share a little bit about my PhD. This is hard. So I thought I'd give some context, but I think we're all well aware of obesity that has been plaguing New Zealand and continues to plague us, and how it disproportionately affects some groups and not others. And these are just some statistics for children and adolescents where our Māori and Pacific communities are, doing worse off than others. So, there's a slide that was here that's not here. I don't know why. I'll just speak. So why did I choose to focus on schools? So all schools are involved in food in some way, either by selling it at the canteen, providing it, fundraising, and so these food systems are already contributing either in positive or negative ways to educational achievement, physical and mental health. So better school food environments are associated more with healthy eating. They relate to higher student education achievement and a lower body mass index. And a recent survey of New Zealand parents and caregivers found overwhelming support for their children's school to limit access to things like sugary drinks and foods, and foods high in fat. So with children and adolescents spending a large proportion of their time in schools. They're there 5 times a week. They consume up to 2 meals there. I thought it would be great to focus on schools, not only because we can target a large proportion at the same time, but also schools are institutions in our society that set precedents for how we look after our children and young people. So why did I choose to focus on South Auckland? Well, we all know that, once again, this area is disproportionately affected with a lot of, fast food outlets, with a lot of, kids at school talk about, passing the takeaway shops that open up extra early around here in compared to other areas. And so I thought, not only from a, justice and human rights approach, it would be important to look at this area. Oh, here it is now. Sorry. I don't know how that happened. So my research aims, so it was to develop a systems understanding of current school food environments and identify where and how systems levers can be applied to create healthier environments. So there's a lot of literature on the variables that make an environment obesogenic, but none specifically focusing on how they all interact with each other, and from in particular New Zealand school food environments and from students' perspectives. So like the previous presentation said, we have to look at the big picture and the environment and all those variables rather than isolating them, because we'll never be able to achieve good outcomes. I wanted to find out what students thought were their main causes and consequences of unhealthy food consumption, so what they identified as most influential. And I also wanted to brainstorm some possible student-led solutions. So to do this, I used system science concepts and methodologies. So system science has been around for decades, and the application of systems thinking and systems tools to the field of obesity prevention is relatively new, though. It has been analyzed theoretically, and it's now being applied in practice in small communities in Australia and the US. Group model building is a methodology that uses system science perspectives to explore complex adaptive problems. It rests on the premise that these complex problems are dynamic in nature and operate in conjunction with other variables. So therefore, by having systemic solutions, it enables us to change the entire behavior of the system and therefore achieve more positive outcomes. So the output of this process is the development of a causal map, where you can see all the variables and how they link in with each other, and therefore help us identify better targeted solutions. So what I did was I worked with 2 secondary schools from South Auckland with students aged between 15 and 17 years. I decided not to involve teachers this time because I didn't want any power differences or anything there, because we were critiquing the school food environment primarily. So I wanted students to feel more comfortable just telling me like it is. So we ran 3 workshops. The first one was to identify the obesogenic variables and the relationships between them. Then we developed our causal map and refined it. And finally, we identified some interventions. So we started off with an activity called the Connection Circle. So we used software developed by Deakin University from Melbourne, where students were able to input various variables around the circle and then identify as many relationships between them. So this not only showed the relationships, but the directionality, so what impacts on what and how. As you can see, there's some with dotted lines that indicates like a decrease between the variables. So I wanted to use highly engaging activities where students were able to, rather than like sit and draw a boring list, they used a computer to do all of this, which was pretty cool and exciting for them. So once that was done, behind the scenes, I worked my magic and I developed a preliminary causal map. And I took this back in the second session to the students and I asked them, am I representing your story correctly? Have I got it all right? Do you want to add anything, delete anything? And group model building is a process where it stresses that the ownership of the problem must rest with the participants, not with yourself. So it was important that I didn't change any words around, I didn't add any connections myself. It had to purely be the students' perspectives shown. And then in the third session, we brainstormed some interventions. So so students have obviously most control over their school food, to some extent, their school food environment rather than outside factors like dairies or the cost of food, things like that. So we chose to focus on 3 variables in school, and then we brainstormed what activities they could take place, but we also looked at possible pushbacks. So we didn't want to come up with all these grand plans and then that not work out. So I played devil's advocate quite a bit, and I was like, oh, but what about this? What if they don't like this? So we went through thoroughly. So the red bits are all the pushbacks, and then the green bits are what would work. So this is the final causal map that was developed. I'm not sure if you can, probably you can see it. So it just shows, the green arrow shows, the increases, the red dotted ones show decreases. The things in the hexagons are the ones that students can't control, like cost of healthy food and unhealthy food ads. And they thought that this was a pretty accurate representation of how hard it is for them to make decisions when choosing to eat healthy food. And it also highlights to the school and to us how complex it is when you are making these nutrition decisions. And then School B had a similar map as well. It looks really intense when you first look at it, but the students got it and they presented it back to their school, and it was pretty exciting to see them talk about it in terms of their own stories and experiences. So, Shiza. Do I keep going? Okay, so just wrap it up quickly. The most influential variable was the number of local shops. So, schools find it really hard to, become healthier, mostly because students are like, oh, I'll just go down to the dairy and buy healthy, unhealthy food. But other variables were the cost, the ads, and their family and peer networks. And they had a similar understanding of the consequences of unhealthy food consumption. And finally, in school food environments, the school canteen and junk food as a reward were the 2 major variables that contributed to unhealthy food consumption.